basically, yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Kristen and I are up here. We're going to be giving you a short presentation on a topic we think is of interest to everybody. So my name is Jill Arend. I'm the Administrator for Data Management and Application Development. And we are going to be talking a little bit about LB296, which is a bill that was just passed this year, and kind of give you a background on it and on how it's going to be affecting you guys as districts. This won't be taking effect for this coming school year, so don't worry about whether or not you are taking notes or anything like that, because you'll be hearing more about it in the time to come. But I'm going to go ahead and let Kristen get started, introduce herself, and she'll get you started on this presentation.
Okay, I am Kristen Yates, and I am the Information Systems Officer at the Nebraska Department of Education. So you may be wondering sort of how do we get to this topic of systems-involved youth? There's been a lot of history to this, and I'm not going to make you stay till dinner time to hear all about it. And a lot of people studying it over time. And over the last couple of years, it's sort of coalesced into actually getting some legislative attention. And I can't see my slides. So who are we talking about in this case? Statutorily, we're talking about students who are under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. Sometimes in education, we talk about at-risk students, and there may be some overlap between those two groups of students, but this statutory definition is very specific. It's students who are in foster care, who are on probation, who are unhoused, who are needing treatment or rehabilitation, who are placed in an out-of-state setting or in foster care. There are other ways of looking at risk, like from an academic perspective, but they sort of chose this court jurisdiction as the bucket for these folks. Why are we concerned about this, and why is the legislature concerned about this? We know that, generally speaking, these students have had poorer outcomes than other students who were not involved, systems involved. And if you look at sort of the national literature, a lot of this has to do with mobility. You are picked up and moved from one place to another place, to another place, and sometimes to another place. And that mobility notion trumps everything else that happens to you. And you see some similarities between students who are incarcerated or students who are in foster care. And not included in this definition, we also have other highly mobile populations of military students, migrant worker students, who also have that same mobility pattern. So the legislation focuses on this at the Department of Education. We care about all at-risk students, obviously, and are interested in, how mobility carries across. There was a study in 2000 looking at some of the specifically outcomes for students who were incarcerated at YRTC. They found that those conditions were not good in a number of ways. Geneva ended up getting closed down, and I think since 2020 in that study, folks have paid a lot more attention to this issue. So in 2023, Legislative Bill 705 was introduced, and basically the notion was, hey, we will give you some money, please hire a consultant to talk about signing a data sharing agreement, and also to meet with all the involved parties and say, what are the things that would be helpful if we had data on so that we can lessen the effect for students who are systems involved. These are the areas that the consultant that we hired was asked to address in their report. We hired a consultant called Bellwether, and some folks may have been involved in that. It was a number of people on the committee from Department of Education, Probation, Court Services, and Department of Health and Human Services, because everybody has a little piece of different parts of these students. They did an incredible amount of outreach work to all over the state. They held focus groups, they did surveys, they talked to parents of students under the jurisdiction of the court, they talked to teachers, they talked to principals, and really most importantly, I think, they talked to the students themselves, which was huge in driving home the point about why this needs to change. This student quote, every time I see it, it just sort of chokes me up. I've been to 5 different high school programs because I have no steady place to stay because of things I've done. A lot of my credits were lost in these transitions. When I went from one placement to another, they wouldn't accept my credits. I've done everything, and my credits have all been lost, so I've given up. That's not ever anything you want to hear from a student. Bellwether made a number of recommendations, and Jill will talk a little bit more about how we're operationalizing some of those recommendations. Key findings, we have tried sort of to patch this together for years across agencies, across students, across districts, and folks have done the best they can, but it hasn't always been successful. So Bellwether said, how about if you, state of Nebraska, sort of consolidate some of those transferring and reporting functions for systems-involved youth at the Department of Education, have registrars or school counselors who can help these students through the path, who can keep a transcript, who can make decisions about students. You know, if you took part of algebra here and you took part of algebra there and you took part of algebra over there, have you covered enough of the content to be awarded credit for algebra? So that is one thing they'll do. Along with the registrars, we also now will have the ability at the department to offer a graduation diploma if the school that the student is a resident of chooses not to. It's always district first in terms of the privilege of awarding that degree to that student when they earn it. These are the rest of their recommendations. I think one thing that I took away from it is keep talking. Keep talking to everybody. Keep talking to everybody who was involved in the group. Keep talking to everybody at the districts. We cannot communicate enough on this issue. And we're just getting started, so there's plenty more communication space to be going on. Do you want the next part, Jill?
Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So I'm going to kind of do a slight sidetrack because our grant that we told you about last year, we're in the second year of right now for the Statewide Longitudinal Data System grant, it intersects with this work. When 2 years ago, this was almost 2 years ago when we were writing this grant, we knew that the bill had been passed in the legislature. We knew that there was going to be this study. And we also knew that in the grant they asked, or they basically recommended that we focus on at-risk youth in our SLDS grant. So we specifically took a look at what we thought might come out of this study and said, okay, how could we utilize the SLDS grant to enhance what we might be asked to do? So we wrote that, and one of our key items that we did have in the grant is stated here, implementing policies, procedures, and systems to improve the educational outcomes of at-risk systems involved youth. That was literally the name of our grant. So you can see that was our main focus and how that intersects then with the work that we're doing under LB296, now that it has been passed and signed by the governor. A couple of the main topics we have to do in order to do that, because obviously as in our SLDS system, and many of you who are data people and not in classrooms, you're like, well, I don't teach the kids. What is it that we can do in the data system to improve these kids' lives? And what we can do is get better data to the places that need it and get it more quickly so those kids can continue their education right away. There's no gaps. There's not pauses. We're not waiting for records to move. So those are some of the things that we thought about as we were writing through the grant, is how can we use our data system to do stuff like that? My background is not in education as far as, I was never a teacher. I've never been in a classroom. I've never given an assessment. So I don't know how that works in the classroom, but I work in data. So what can we do in the data side? So one of the things that is in the grant, not specifically, but one of the things that I do have as an outcome I want of this grant is to get more data to the districts about the students they're enrolling. Now, obviously, there's a real focus here. We can really talk about how we're doing this for the systems involved youth, for the kids who are moving around and are at risk, not just at risk because they're involved in the system, but at risk because they're very mobile. They move a lot. Their records don't catch up with them. But in reality, when we get this implemented, it's going to help every single kid, because you enroll a student, you put that student into your SIS and send that enrollment record up to advisor. We now see you have that kid. We want to identify a set of data that we can then send back down to you. It might include whether or not they're special education. That's a big one with these systems involve kids. The kids that go to the Rule 18s and things like that, frequently they're not getting their services. So we can let you know that they are a special education student. We can let you know that they've been identified as homeless this year. Maybe you weren't aware of that when they enrolled, but in reality, they qualify for those services all year. We can let you know about their attendance. We can pass down the assessment data we do have in Advisor. We can pass back down to you. So, we're working right now, NWA data, we're getting NWA map data all the time. We can pass that data back down to you as a district. And we still have to identify what data we're talking about. We have to identify what data sets. I'm gonna guess that some people would not want us to pass discipline data back down, but other people may want us to. We're gonna have to have those conversations, and we're gonna have to have conversations with districts about what they want to receive when they're enrolling these kids. We're gonna have to have conversation with vendors about how do we implement this at the vendor level. Are you populating data? Are you showing it to the districts, to the people at the registrars, things like that? So the data backpack, it's frequently a term used across the nation, and if you went to Terry's session earlier today, you met a gentleman from EdFi. When we go to the EdFi conferences, it's talked a lot at EdFi. A lot of different states are working on a data backpack program. And that's just the idea that the data moves with the student. So, as Krista mentioned on what we frequently like to simply call the bellwether bill with LB296, because it is implementing a lot of those recommendations, the three major points that NDE needs to do under this bill. The first is a data system, the registrars, as she mentioned, and also the offering of a state diploma. As you know, there's never been a state diploma. There are other states that have had them. Nebraska has not been one of those states, so this is a change for us. I did put a QR code if you are interested in actually reading the bill. You can grab that. Otherwise, you can go to the legislature's website and download a copy of it, because it has been signed, again, signed by the governor. This is actually going into place. So I want to hit on the first thing. That's the data system. So we're not going to create a whole new data system, by the way. Why? We have one. We have Advisor, right? It has a lot of data in it. There's no reason to create another system. There are some changes that would need to be made. I'm going to go over a few of those things a little bit later. But we already have a centralized education record system. There might be some gaps as far as like grades and how good the grades data is, how frequently we're getting it. We'll have to have discussions about that. Also, we only have to have this for students who are under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court, as Krista mentioned before, but that is a pretty broad term. A lot of your foster kids are under the jurisdiction of a juvenile court. You may not think of it that way, but they are. And we have to make sure that education services aren't disrupted for these kids. The records are promptly shared. This is where the backpack, I think, could really become in handy. It says, literally, it has that language in the bill, promptly shared. And that credit hours are awarded, as Kristen mentioned. Kristen talked a little bit about the students under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. How are we going to know what students these are? We aren't relying on you guys to tell us, by the way. That is not what we're going to do, because a lot of times you don't know. We are actually starting meetings with the different groups that were also involved in the bellwether consultation. We are talking to people from the Supreme Courts. We are talking to people from parole. We are talking to people from DHHS about how we can get that data, what students are involved, when they begin their involvement, when they end their involvement, and then we'll kind of, obviously, we're not going to get their ND student IDs. They don't have those. So we're going to have to get enough information on those kids to run them through person ID, match them up with an ND student ID, so we can then have that list. I think that one of the jobs of the registrars will probably be to help us resolve some of those near matches where we're not sure who the kid is. But they also may be reaching out to you, hey, we think it's this kid. So you at the district, am I right? Is this the right kid? Because we have to identify these kids. We have to keep that list of them. We're also going to have to, ensure that we can track now their data, and we have their data, and we look at their data in the data system, or in that centralized record system, which will become Advisor. Krista mentioned we're going to be hiring registrars. I'm going to guess you probably would agree that it's not your registrars determining credit at the district, it's your guidance counselors. So we're probably looking for people with some of that kind of experience. They're going to be, again, having to reach out to school districts. They're going to have to be reaching out to our non-publics because we don't have that data in Advisor. They're going to have to be reaching out to homeschool and figure out these homeschool kids. If your district isn't already doing that, out of state, they might have to be doing that kind of outreach. They also might be working, you guys as a district may be working with us to make those resolutions on these kids as they're moving into your district. But our registrars will be looking for those gaps and reaching out to whoever it takes to fill those gaps in. And then, as Krista mentioned, awarding credit hours where appropriate. So the extra is the state diploma. That is something we have not done. It is not all kids under the jurisdiction of juvenile court. It's only in those that are in out-of-home placement during high school. It specifically says that. It doesn't say 9th grade on, anything like that. It says in high school in the bill. And so there might be some decisions like, what does that mean? How do we decide that that's when they're in high school? But it also could mean that a student that is in out-of-home placement in 9th grade, now they are an 11th grader, they moved to your district, you're not even aware that they were ever in an out-of-home placement. But they qualify for this state diploma. We're going to have ways to let you know that these kids are in this bucket and they potentially qualify and that we're tracking these kids. And then the bill is, if you read through the bill, it does talk about how the district where the student is now enrolled or has been enrolled in high school can award the diploma based upon state graduation requirements, which is a little different. It's always been before the districts had their own graduation requirements. Those are the diplomas you award. This does allow for districts to award a diploma for students if they have met the state graduation requirements, which is a subset. Your graduation requirements can never be less than the state requirements, but they can obviously be more. If a district is not awarding that, but the student qualifies and has met all of the state requirements for graduating, the state can then issue the diploma. So what does that mean for us? Well, all of a sudden now we're going to have to do transcripts. We haven't had to do that. So that's going to be something different for NDE. We're going to have to figure out how to show those students as graduates. I would think you as districts would have an interest in awarding this because it would count toward your cohort in a positive manner to have these kids show up as graduates. But that is something else we're going to have to work on, and our registrars are going to be very vital to this also. We're also going to have to figure out a way for these students to essentially apply for the state diploma, because it won't be automatically awarded just because they've met the requirements. They're going to have to tell us they want that state diploma. And so that system will have to be figured out. Now, all this does not go into place, as you saw earlier on a slide, until 26, 27. But that isn't much time to figure a lot of this stuff out. It's a year away. So a year from now, we've been giving you a lot more information than we are right now. So I spent my portion talking a little bit about SLDS. So how does SLDS play a part? Well, the statewide longitudinal data system isn't just a grant. It's actually our data system. It's Advisor. It's all of the student data we have on the students. And about 87% of all students in Nebraska are already in Advisor. So we have a lot of your data already to meet these needs, where we have to keep this centralized education record system. We have all the public districts in there, and these facility-based schools from correctional services and DHHS, they're already in there. We sometimes call them special purpose or state-operated schools. They're already required to submit data to us. We're already getting that information. It does leave some data out. Again, your non-publics, your out-of-state data. Rule 18s, the data right now that we have is only what the resident district submits to us. One of the things we do have in the grant is to potentially improve the flow of data between the Rule 18s, NDE, and the districts. And that's something we're hoping to be able to work on under the grant. And that would make a huge improvement. So more specifically, how does it affect you guys as districts and the data that you're submitting to Advisor? There may need to be some changes in the data that we collect. This is not decided yet. This is just some ideas and things we've been talking about up at the agency about what we might need in order to do this. We might need better information on course grades, including how you do your grading system. If our vendors are, if our registrars are having to try to determine whether or not to award credit, how are they going to do that? We might need better information on what kind of credits you offer per course, which we're not collecting right now. And we might need some information on district graduation requirements. If we're trying to also have our registrars help take a look at whether or not these kids are meeting district graduation requirements, to assist you guys in that, or to look at these kids that are moving around a lot. You know, some of this, when it talks about the state diploma, I believe the language actually said anywhere the student was enrolled during high school, if they meet the ability to have the state diploma, any of those districts could award them a diploma. Well, we might be talking to a district they're in 11th grade. Hey, they've now met all your requirements. And that is a difference, yeah, it says that in the language. We got to figure out exactly what that means. We've got to talk to our legal counsel and have some interpretations. So, but we might be asking you then for what your district graduation requirements are. We've never collected that before as a whole. We have a little bit of information we collect on math and science and which courses, how many courses you require, but not to the level of detail that this is. And we're not talking about the distinct graduation requirements you have for these subsets of kids. We're talking about your general graduation requirements. So Advisor, as it is, part of EdFi, and if you, again, went to Terry's or Max, also talked a little bit about the EdFi standard. That EdFi standard is already set up to receive this data. So our system is technically already set up to receive the information. We have never asked for it before, so we've never worked with the vendors to integrate it. That is, again, something we're going to have to talk about internally. We're going to have to do some stakeholder outreach with school districts and with vendors about what this might mean and how we might collect it and what it might look like. And I'm sure I'm missing something. If you think of something, hey, you're also going to need to know this because you guys have been in the districts, let us know. If you don't know how to let us know, our email addresses are at the end of this. You can also just send it out to the service desk email and say, hey, pass this on. You can always send something to the service desk email, right, Naomi? Yes, they'll pass it on to us. Trust me, I get in the JITBIT system all the time. Okay, so I know we gave you a lot of information. What kind of questions does anybody want to ask? Again, this is not starting 25, 26. We got a whole year, to get this figured out. But, yeah, is there any questions anybody wants to ask right now about this? Yes? How are we going to standardize the credits? That's a very good question. That is one of the things we have to work out. I think we're going to rely on our registrars to help us make that decision too. And we're going to be doing, again, we're going to have a lot of discussions to have at the agency. If you have any recommendations for us, let us know. But that is one of the good questions that we have to figure out. Yes?
So will they have to do everything like state testing? They'll have to take ACT as a junior?
Yeah.
I mean, in their 4 years, they'll have to do that. They'll have to report FAFSA.
Yeah.
All that the other graduates do?
Yeah, she asked if they have to do everything else the graduates have to do. Yes, because, and technically these kids are at a district. So they're still meeting all the other. They're in a cohort, they're still taking the, if they're at your district, if they're at your district in the year that their cohort's taking the test, they should be taking the test, absolutely.
What's the difference, though, like if this child came to our district, we put in all their credits, all their grades, what's the difference of the state doing that versus the district doing it?
So we are, obviously, we will be looking for you guys to get that information in. But we're going to be looking for gaps where it isn't getting done, where it is missing, and working on trying to find that. So, you know, they're going to be coming to your districts. But also, if they could be systems involved and in a non-public. So now we're not getting that data. So our registrars are going to have to work with the non-publics to keep their data updated because they now have to be in our system. So a lot of this, yes, we're still going to rely on you guys to do. You're going to do what you normally do. You're going to evaluate their credits. But we also might, if you guys say, no, that doesn't count toward a credit, and the students they think they do, so they want to apply for a state diploma, they might come to us and ask us to look at it, and our registrars might decide that from a state perspective, to meet the state requirement, it meets, and now we're going to award the credit.
Well, and I see that especially as we get students from Guam or, you know, places out of the country.
Yeah.
They're kind of misplaced when they come here. We just got some as a junior.
Yeah, she mentioned that get some students from out of the country and whether or not they're placed correctly. Of course, if they're not systems involved, they're not in this system.
The state might be able to help in some of that, trying to keep them with that cohort. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, she mentioned that she thought the state could help with that, and I don't think it's within the bound of this. I think what we might find is that as the registrars are doing more, they might identify additional things that could be done, and again, they would have to provide that in legislation and provide us the funding.
So it's just
It is, right now, the only ones that qualify for the diploma are under the jurisdiction of juvenile court who are an out-of-home placement in high school. So, okay, well, thank you, everybody. Oh, another question there. I can't quite hear what you're asking. Yeah, she asked if the kids aren't advocating for themselves, is Indy going to be reaching out to the districts? One of the things, I believe it was on one of Kristen's slides, was that we would determine if a student had qualified for the state diploma, and I think then, yes, we can then do an outreach to you guys as a district and say, hey, you can graduate this student even if they haven't met all of your requirements. You can now graduate them under the state diploma guidance. So, okay, I do have our email addresses up here, but we also do have, is Max here? Yep. Oh, Max, we want to give away, before we break for the vendor session, we are going to have a vendor session where you guys, vendor networking session, where you guys can go network with vendors, and there should be, at least when you get in there or soon thereafter, we're going to have some dessert for you in there, some cookies, brownies, things like that, so you can follow up your dinner. But before that, Max is going to go ahead and give away the raffle prizes that were offered by Computer Information Concepts, excuse me, my name.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Yes, CIC, who does Infinite Campus support, is one of our sponsors here, paid for some Yeti products here. We'll start with the big cooler. We've picked names just from anyone who has claimed their badge and shown up. So, first up, I've got Barb, also, I don't think I've ever said this out loud before. Olsufka, right? From Aurora. Thank you. You take the big cooler, or if you want something smaller, you can downgrade. Number 2, Terry Norris. And third one we have, Brian Gibson. All right, that's it. We just have 3. Thanks, everyone. Oh, sorry.
There was a cell phone turned in, so if anybody has lost their cell phone.
I do know, I saw at least one person claim one, but yeah, you can check with Jeannie at the front desk there if you lost your cell phone. Yeah, we have time now until 1:45. Like we said, the snacks should be over in the break room, along with time to check out everyone who has a desk over there. One more program note, I just wanted to mention, if you didn't hear the 3 o'clock session on statewide assessment, we did have to cancel that one. So we didn't update the printed copies, obviously, but just let you know. All right, thanks, everyone.